Foul. 2 balls and a strike to count on Taylor. Reyes fires, swinging a drive, deep left field. This is way back. Walk the ball. Chris Taylor.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined today by Matt Moreno. Matt, it's the first full, long-form DodgerHeads of the 2022 season. We've got news coming fast all the time, all over the place. Kenley Jansen, Freddie Freeman, updates everywhere. But it's pretty exciting that we're here and that the season is seemingly right around the corner.
Definitely. It's a couple months ago, it was difficult to see when we would finally get to this point just because the lockout was dragging on and there was no progress. But here we finally are. Baseball's being played. Regular season will be here before we know it. And I know you're going to share some exciting news that relates to that.
Absolutely. We got an exciting update I'll get to in just a second, but here's the plan for the show. If you're new to DodgerHeads, welcome. We appreciate you joining us. Essentially what we do is once a week, it'll be Mondays or Tuesdays for the next few weeks. In the regular season, these will be coming out on Monday on YouTube. But we do a long-form show. It's kind of like our full 1 hour long episode where we're catching up on all the news, talking about rumors, talking about updates, previewing upcoming series, that kind of thing. So the way this will work today is we're going to talk about an exciting update. We're going to talk Freddie Freeman, some new information about that contract just kind of 4 or 5 days later. How are we feeling about what might be the biggest free agent signing in franchise history? We'll talk about the news that Kenley Jansen signed a 1-year contract with the Braves and where that leaves the Dodger bullpen in particular. Some pitching signings. The Dodgers add presumably a guy who's going to be the number 5 starter, as well as some injured yet familiar names that might factor in a few months. And then finally, we'll talk spring training and get an update on that. But first, let's talk about some exciting news. If you're following us on Twitter, you might already know this, but as of this week, we are officially partnered with Blue Wire Podcast Network, and this show, which we post on YouTube every week, will begin being published as a podcast, like I said, with Blue Wire Podcast Network. Now, that's exciting for me, especially, I guess, because I'm a big fan of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. They've got Chris Long's show on there. Megan Rapinoe and Sue Bird have a show on there. Of course, Lakers Nation has a show on there. So a great partner for us to be with. So that show will post on Tuesday. So anywhere you get your podcast, I know we're up on Apple. I understand we're in the process of getting posted on places like Spotify and elsewhere. But if you are a podcast person, please subscribe, rate, review DodgerHeads podcast on Apple, wherever you find your stuff. It's really exciting stuff there. And obviously, if you prefer the YouTube show, we're not going anywhere. This will still be posted here every week, like I said, on Mondays or Tuesdays for the next few weeks, and then Mondays during the regular season. We're going to still have some quick hitters unique to YouTube, so you're going to want to be following us in both places. But I don't know, Matt. I'm a podcast guy. I've been looking forward to this day. For the company, it's an exciting thing, but Blue Wire is a great podcast partner.
Yeah, we're excited to kind of finally get an audio-focused podcast going, obviously, and we'll keep it current for everybody, and yeah.
Absolutely. Well, let's get into some news, and let's start with something you and I talked about already last week, which is Freddie Freeman is officially a Dodger. We know the terms, but what's interesting is that some of those terms have sort of slightly changed. So before we get into those details, let me just start with a big picture. Freddie Freeman signs with the Dodgers on Wednesday night. We're here recording this on Monday. Has anything changed in your perception of the Freddie Freeman signing as you've gone to bed a few times and woken up thinking about Freddie Freeman? Are you more excited, less excited, or about the same?
I think about the same. And, I think the deferred money that we're going to get into is an interesting wrinkle, but, at least for me, it doesn't change anything. It doesn't feel like, now the contract is really worth it, or why did they do that type thing. I mean, we've been on here several times saying, they sort of needed him. One, because you had a hole at second base that now Max Muncy can fill. Two, there is still a little bit of unknown with Max Muncy and his health. As confident as he is in his elbow, you still don't sort of know. He admitted, I need to get into games before I can really gauge things. So Freddie Freeman obviously is a buffer for that. And again, Cody Bellinger, there's less pressure on him to sort of rebound from last season and, on down the line.
I loved Muncy's quote of, hey, if I'm going to be playing second base, I need to get in a little bit better shape, maybe lose a little bit of weight running around out there. So that was a good quote. Funny stuff. But you alluded. I mean, I'll say this. I said at the time, I thought Freddie Freeman was going to get 6 years, $180 million. I thought he was worth every penny of 6 years, $180 million. The fact that the Dodgers paid him about $20 million less was just gravy to me. I won't repeat myself. If you saw our Wednesday show, you know I've said this about 100 times. I think he's durable. I don't think first basemen wear down as much. I think in 2022, guys don't wear down as quickly as they used to. I think with the universal DH and Freddie Freeman's style of play, he's not built on athleticism. I think all of those things, to me, indicate that this is a guy who is going to age well. This contract is going to be good. But the news that you hinted at, the deferrals, actually makes this contract even better. So there's $57 million in deferrals in Freeman's contract that will be paid out over the next 20 years or something like that. But here's the interesting part. The Players Association, whenever a contract is signed that includes deferred money, they come up with a number. I don't know what their calculation is, but they come up with a number to reflect the fact that millions of dollars Freeman makes in 2040, while it might be millions of dollars then, it's not worth that necessarily as much now. They calculated that the present day value of Freeman's 6-year deal is only $148 million, which means essentially the Dodgers are getting Freddie Freeman for a tad under $25 million a year in average annual value, which is a steal to me, especially when you consider two of the contracts that have been signed in baseball of late. Trevor Story just signed a 6-year, $140 million deal. So that's a $23.5 million average annual value. So about $1 million and change less per year than Freddie Freeman. And then Kris Bryant signed a 7-year, $182 million with the Rockies. That's a $26 million average annual value. So he is making more per year than Freddie Freeman based on current value. For me, that's shocking. I think Trevor Story is a good player. I think Kris Bryant is a good player. Neither of those guys are in the stratosphere of Freddie Freeman. And yes, they play different positions. There's more versatility. And yes, they are both a few years younger than Freddie Freeman. But man, I would much rather be paying Freddie Freeman those dollars for the next 3, 4, 5 years than Kris Bryant or Trevor Story. Am I crazy on that one?
I don't think so. I mean, I think if it wasn't going to be Freddie Freeman, Kris Bryant is somebody who I thought the Dodgers could potentially look to sign. I didn't think that he would end up getting a deal that he ended up receiving with the Rockies. I think some of that is the Rockies realize that we're the Rockies and we kind of need to throw big money if we're going to get somebody like Kris Bryant. The Trevor Story contract definitely did surprise me just because it's gotten pretty late into free agency, if you will. And obviously spring training is underway and I just didn't see a team, coming that needed a long-term shortstop, and the Red Sox definitely weren't that team. But I guess they do have some uncertainty with free agency factors with Bogarts moving forward, so that could kind of make sense. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I don't have any concerns over Freeman's deal and how he'll kind of age with it. And like I said before, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but if the Dodgers win one World Series between now and the next 4 or 5 years before maybe you start to see some of his decline, the contract would have been absolutely worth it.
Yeah, I look at Freeman's deal and think he's worth $30 million a year this year and probably the next year. At least. If they had signed him to a 2-year, $60 million deal, you could sign him to $70. Probably people wouldn't have blinked an eye at that if we're talking a high AAV kind of a deal. So if you factor in that and play it on down the road, that means the last 4 years, you're basically signing him for $80 million, $20 million a year. And again, if he's worth $30 million in year 3, that number goes down. So to me, the Freeman piece is interesting. Here's the other thing that's fascinating, Matt, and you and I are going to record a bunch of videos talking about positional rankings and where the Dodgers land on ESPN's list and MLB's list, and I love talking about that kind of a thing. But I had somebody on Twitter talking to me and saying, hey, well, Trevor Story, yes, he's getting $23.5 million, but he is younger, and he plays a more premium position in shortstop. But when you look at those lists, and I was using Buster Olney's list as an example, again, MLB has done their own, there are way more shortstops right now than there are first basemen. I know historically we have in our minds this idea that it's way easier to find a first baseman. First basemen are worth less than shortstops. The 10th best first baseman on Buster Olney's list was Brandon Belt. Number 11 was Jared Walsh, who I believe plays for the Angels. Don't know a ton about Jared Walsh. Yeah. I'm sure he's a fine player. Ty France was on the list for the Mariners. I mean, that's what we're talking. Now, you flip and you go to shortstops. Trevor Story's not in the top 10 shortstops in baseball. Javier Baez is not in the top 10 shortstops in baseball. And so it's actually interesting the way the landscape has shifted. And I'm not saying first base is a more valuable position, but I'm just saying you look at the quality that is out there. And by the way, Freddie Freeman, the number 1 first baseman. So we're comparing the number 1 first baseman to the number 12 shortstop, according to Buster Olney. But that was just an interesting thing to me, is just how deep the shortstop position is and how not deep the first base position is. Not to mention designated hitter, etc. I mean, are you surprised by that when you've looked at these lists?
I mean, a little bit. I think there's also a ton of nuance if we want to specifically talk about it from the Dodgers angle, right? Like,
Yeah.
if I think we agree, had they not signed Freddie Freeman, then they probably were going to approach Trey Turner with a contract extension, during spring training or the regular season, which he said he's open to signing. Now with Freeman in the mix, that can probably gets kicked down the road a little bit. They need to get to a new offseason, maybe see what the landscape is. But also, from the Dodgers' perspective, I think now if they went, sure, you would love for them to re-sign Trey Turner, but if that doesn't happen and they go with a more maybe defensive-minded shortstop who's not, a Trevor Story or a Trey Turner or a Corey Seager, I think we'll all not necessarily bat an eye, right? Because you have now a big bat at first base. Your outfield is pretty stacked. Second base is short up. So there's stuff like that. And I think shortstops, I mean, it is interesting to kind of see how, the ebbs and flows with that position where, before it used to be, at one point, it was sort of defensive minded. Obviously, you had your Derek Jeters, your Alex Rodriguez, and all those guys. And I think we're now kind of seeing that era again.
Yeah.
But who knows what it could be, moving forward.
Totally. And the Dodgers, again, they have a couple guys on the 40-man, Jacob Amaya, Yorvit Vivas, who are shortstop types. Obviously, Chris Taylor can play shortstop. Gavin Lux potentially could play shortstop. So they've got some options, but to your point, like, it would be a different look than sort of the all-around Corey Seager, Trey Turner that we have become accustomed to. One other note I want to chat briefly about on the Freddie Freeman piece, because I think it's fascinating, is the Dodgers lineup and how all of this shakes out. Now, the Dodgers lineup is insane. We've joked on here, how many All-Stars do the Dodgers have? You go down their lineup. I mean, they've got 3 guys who have won MVP awards. Just about everybody else has been at least an All-Star at some point. So they've got essentially 9 All-Stars on this list. I mean, AJ Pollock, I don't know if he's made an All-Star game. He might be the only guy who hasn't made an All-Star game. I'm not sure if he made one with Arizona.
I think he might have made one with the Diamondbacks.
Okay, so there you go. So then you would have 9 guys essentially who have made All-Star teams after Chris Taylor made one last year. But I'm curious, have you started in your mind to go down the list and how you would put this lineup together? Obviously, you've got tons of guys with versatility. You've got a couple guys in Mookie and Trey who tend to be up towards the top. But then you basically, from the 3 through 9, you could pretty much put any of those guys in the 3, 4, 5 spot, and nobody would really question it. Maybe Freddie Freeman batting 9th, people would have some issues with. But have you started to think through putting that together and how you would structure it?
I have a little bit, and I'll give you one set lineup that I think, like, I guess I need to approach it from, what I would do is different than what I expect the Dodgers to do. And the main difference is, for me, Trey Turner needs to be batting leadoff. The issue with that is we've seen with Mookie Betts over the past 2 years, whenever the Dodgers have moved him out of the leadoff spot, he has struggled for whatever reason. So Mookie has said that he's open to hitting wherever, but the statistics and production kind of suggest otherwise. So because of that, the Dodgers have basically kept him locked in the leadoff spot, and I don't think that that's necessarily the best lineup for them, but so it goes. So my
now, real
order
quick,
would be
Trey Turner.
Trey Turner.
What is it about Trey Turner that you like him more at the top versus Mookie Betts?
I think he offers similar power. Obviously, he's a better speed threat if he does reach first base, and I think some of Mookie's lack of stolen bases last year obviously can be tied to some of the health issues he was dealing with that now are supposed to be in the past. I think Trey is also maybe a little bit more of a better contact hitter of just putting the ball in play type thing. And, maybe the advanced metrics and all that won't support my viewpoints and theories, but that's kind of where I land with the eye test. So
I think
with
it's
that
fair.
Being said, my lineup would be Trey Turner, Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, Justin Turner, Max Muncy, Will Smith, AJ Pollock as the DH, Chris Taylor in left field, and Cody Bellinger in center field. And I think that's pretty much a lineup you can run out against whether you're facing a right or left-handed starter. Obviously, if Bellinger starts to struggle against left-handed pitching, then you get a little bit maybe you put Chris Taylor in center field, AJ Pollock in left, and figure out your DH or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, so you've got Bellinger batting 9th in your lineup.
Yeah.
Okay. One thing that's interesting to me, and I mentioned this to you right before we started recording, Daniel and I have had lots of conversations about hitting first and hitting second, and I do think hitting first is probably the only spot in the lineup that really has a mental aspect to it. I think whether you hit 2 through 9, like I can't imagine there's a huge difference between hitting second and hitting 7th kind of a thing. But first feels like a big deal because you're going up there. Nobody's seen the pitcher yet. You're the first guy. There's a little bit of nerves. Nobody has settled into the game yet. In 2020 and 2021, Mookie Betts has not been nearly as good outside of the leadoff spot as he's been in it. What's interesting is I went back and looked at his career. He actually has a higher career batting average from the 2-hole than he does the leadoff spot. He's hitting 307 for his career in the 2-hole versus 298 in the leadoff spot. Again, 2020 and 2021, if you just zoom in on his time with the Dodgers, it's dramatically different. It's dramatically worse. Trey, on the other hand, has actually been pretty consistent. He's hit 301 as a leadoff guy, 312 in the 2-hole, and 350 in the 3-hole. Less experience in the 3-hole. Weighted runs created plus, obviously, also increases. So 119 as a leadoff guy, 135 as a 2-hole, 174 in the 3-hole. So I think you could make an argument either way there. I don't know. With the eye test, Trey Turner, I know Mookie Betts has incredible speed. I know he's a great base runner. Trey Turner just might be the best base runner I've ever seen. I mean, his ability to go first to third in the blink of an eye. He's a much better stolen base threat. Mookie Betts is a very good stolen base threat. Trey Turner might be the best in all of baseball. And so, to me, I'm with you. If it were strictly up to me and I had complete confidence in Mookie Betts, then I would probably put Trey Turner in the first spot. For my lineup right now, I've got Mookie in the 1 spot because, like you said, I just think that's what the Dodgers are going to do. And I think we're splitting hairs trying to decide between Mookie and Trey Turner. I think you could do either. They're both right-handed hitters, so there's no difference there. So I've got Mookie 1, Trey 2. I've got Freddie Freeman 3. He's your first lefty in the lineup. So if a team wants to do an opener or something like that, they've got to get to Freddie Freeman with the righty. So good luck with that. No surprise to anybody who's followed this show. I've got my guy Will Smith batting 4th. I understand the Justin Turner spot there, professional hitter, veteran guy. Will Smith's just better offensively right now than Justin Turner is, so I like Will Smith in the 4 spot. I've got Muncy 5th. Again, that gives us another lefty. Justin Turner 6th, so we've got lefty, righty, lefty, righty. Bellinger 7th. Again, another lefty there. And then Pollock and Chris Taylor 8th and 9th. I'm with you. A.J. Pollock is the guy that I would be trying to get out of the lineup defensively if I could. I know a lot of people are penciling Justin Turner into a lot of DH spots, probably Max Muncy. I actually think A.J. Pollock might get more turns in the DH than anybody else. But yeah, and I could see, obviously, moving Bellinger down a little bit would split it up so you don't have 4 straight righties once you get 8, 9, 1, 2. We're also talking about A.J. Pollock, Chris Taylor, Trey Turner, and Mookie Betts. So, I don't really think any of those guys are going to get, it's a huge advantage to go righty against all 4 of those. The point being, that's an absolutely insane lineup. Bench-wise, just to throw this out, I've got Gavin Lux and Edwin Rios as lefties. I know you've said you wonder if Edwin Rios plays some AAA. I've got him at the Major League level. Hanser Alberto and Austin Barnes is the other 2 bench spots as far as righties go. So that's a pretty insane lineup. I mean, I can't think of a team that has ever had a better lineup than that.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, you'd have to go back, decades to look at some of, maybe the Yankees, World Series winning teams and stuff like that to find something comparable. But to back things up a little bit more, when you were talking about Mookie splits, part of me wonders if, he's struggled since coming over to the National League. Could that be a difference where, I don't know if it doesn't necessarily make sense, right? Because if you're the leadoff hitter, then you're like you just said, you're the first batter sort of facing that pitcher. You haven't really seen him yet. So wouldn't necessarily explain why he has struggled batting second as opposed to leadoff. But could that be a factor perhaps? And I think there's also another argument to be made is, the 2-hole in the lineup is often pointed to more recently as that's where you want your best hitter to be, right? And now that arguably is Freddie Freeman.
Yeah.
Should he be batting second?
Yeah. Yeah, and I had people saying Max Muncy should be batting second because of his approach and obviously getting a lefty in there, and then you move Freddie Freeman down to the 4-hole. I mean, for me, Freddie Freeman, I just want him in that top 3. I want him batting as much as humanly possible. I mean, it's a weird thing to say, who is the best hitter in the Dodgers lineup? But I think Mookie Betts, Trey Turner, Freddie Freeman, I think those are the 3 best hitters in the Dodger lineup. Would you disagree with that?
I think when Max Muncy is healthy, you need to put him in that group as well. And I mean, Justin Turner, they haven't batted him second, but I think he's somebody who can conduct and knows how to conduct an at bat for you. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, for me, I would probably, I definitely agree. Freeman can't hit any lower than 3rd. So he's either going to be 2nd or 3rd in the lineup. I get, kind of the mentality of a cleanup hitter, power guy. He sort of fits that profile, but I wouldn't put him there.
Yeah, they've got 6 other guys that fit that profile as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, there's a million ways they could go with the lineup, and we'll probably see close to that number throughout the regular season, so long, hopefully, as everybody is healthy. And then, if and when the playoffs arrive, that'll be, really interesting. It's interesting to see how they locked it in.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And again, I'll be curious to see. I can't imagine Mookie and Trey not being 1 and 2, and I can't imagine Freddie Freeman not being 3. Now you can mix the order of 1 and 2, but I feel pretty good about those 3. I don't think Will Smith actually hits 4th. I just think he should hit 4th, unless you want to put Muncy there and go back-to-back lefties, which I don't think they'll want to do. But let's shift a little bit from some exciting, positive, good Dodger news to some pretty sad news, which is Kenley Jansen gone, signing with the Braves, a 1-year, $16 million contract that Kenley gets. Interesting stuff. Well, I'll make this note. So Jansen, of course, played his first 12 seasons in Major League Baseball with the Dodgers. One fun note about Jansen to the Braves is that Andrew Jones, kind of the countryman, the hometown kid from Curacao who played with the Braves. So Jansen says he grew up a Braves fan. So kind of cool for him if he's going to leave the Dodgers to be able to go to a team that he grew up liking. I mean, very similar, honestly, to the Freddie Freeman story of him growing up in Southern California. But I thought this was interesting from Jorge Castillo from the LA Times. He had some great insight. He said Jansen was looking for a 3-year deal all offseason, couldn't find it anywhere. No surprise to me, no surprise to you that people weren't willing to give him a 3-year deal. What was interesting is that the Dodgers actually did commit to giving him a 2-year offer. But as soon as they signed Freddie Freeman, it complicated things because now basically their payroll had gone up so high that the Dodgers basically said, we don't really want to go over 290. So before we come back to you with a new offer, we've got to move some pieces around and get ourselves under that. Part of, I think, what they were hoping for is to get some clarity on Trevor Bauer's situation. If a suspension had been issued, which again is what is expected at this point, then they would be able to figure out how much of his salary is coming off of the books for this season. Is it half of his salary? Is it a quarter of his salary? Is it 10% of his salary? But again, that can was kicked further down the road, so they got no clarity. So they couldn't make an offer. The Braves basically came to Jansen and said, we'll give you 1 year, $16 million. You've got a few hours to decide. He ends up taking it. I am not surprised that Kenley Jansen is back. I'm honestly, the most surprising element of that to me is that the Dodgers actually made him a 2-year offer. I'd be fascinated to know what the numbers are, but what surprises you about the story that Castillo tells with Jansen, the Dodgers, and the Braves?
The most surprising thing to me is that he only ended up signing a 1-year deal.
Yeah.
I didn't think he'd get 3 years. I thought he would be able to get 2. And when I saw that it ended up being 1, then I was surprised that the Dodgers didn't re-sign him. And frankly, 1 year, $16 million, that's something I would have done, even if it would have right now put them over that luxury tax threshold that they're trying to, the highest one that they're trying to stay below. Because to me, you just kind of figure it out later.
Yeah.
I know we're going to get into some of the bullpen, and they do have some depth and certainly some options and flexibility. But I think for 1 more year of Kenley Jansen at $16 million, like that would have been worth it. What I also found interesting is the Braves, they seem to love their deadlines, because if you read, I believe it was Buster Olney who had a Freddie Freeman article out right before he was introduced with the Dodgers. They kind of took a similar approach. I think they might have said, here's our contract offer. Like, you have a deadline to sort of accept it or leave it, take it or leave it. I guess if you're the defending World Series champions, you could kind of get away with that stuff. Kenley, I don't fault him obviously for taking the certainty with the Braves, just because, spring training has started. If this were a normal offseason and the Braves took that similar approach in December or January, I could see him maybe sort of waiting a few more weeks. But obviously that's not a luxury that players have right now.
Yeah. Yeah, the only piece I would disagree with is I'm perfectly fine with the Dodgers not giving him this year. $16 million is a lot. And you and I were talking earlier about how would the Dodgers have made some space in their payroll, and something that you and I have talked about before is AJ Pollock a guy who might be available on the trade market. He's on a very team-friendly deal, so somebody acquiring him would need to part with an asset. Maybe the Dodgers sort of trade from a position of strength offensively, either get back a prospect, get back obviously a 40-man roster spot potentially, some cap flexibility, that kind of a thing. But for me, if you said, all right, you can either have AJ Pollock or Kenley Jansen on this 2022 Los Angeles Dodgers team, and obviously the numbers aren't an exact match. Jansen's contract is actually higher than Pollock's. I'm not honestly convinced that I would take Jansen. That might sound super controversial to some people. AJ Pollock was very good last season, but it's also worth pointing out, as deep as the Dodgers are, they don't have a surefire guy that could fill in for AJ Pollock's spot in the lineup. I mean, Gavin Lux would be the next man up. I like Gavin Lux, so maybe this is sounding contradictory to some. But I don't know. I feel really good about the Dodgers bullpen, and I love having a guy like A.J. Pollock in the lineup because I think he's underrated offensively. I sense that you disagree with that if you had to choose between Pollock and Jansen, you would take Jansen for 1 year?
Oh man, that's tough. It's honestly a toss-up. I think at the end of the day, I probably would have to agree with you. And a lot of that stems from just, the Dodgers bench. As much as it looks improved from last year, there still are question marks for me.
We lived through the horror of the bench last year.
So, if you take A.J. Pollock out of that equation, then you lose, obviously, another position player. It puts another starter into the lineup and just the domino effect. Whereas I think the Dodgers are better positioned to withstand losing Kenley Jansen. Also, if they need to kind of play him with, a trade at some point, I think that would be easier than finding maybe a bat, because we saw it like they didn't really address. I mean, they signed Albert Pujols largely because he was an unexpected released by the Angels.
Yeah.
But other than that, the bench went sort of unaddressed.
Yeah. Here's interesting on Pollock. So between 2020 and 2021, he played in 172 games. So we're talking a tad over a full season. And obviously, nobody on the Dodgers is going to be playing 162 games. You can pencil that in right now. Maybe Freddie Freeman. Who knows? He's a guy that seems to like to be in there every day. 172 games. How many home runs would you guess A.J. Pollock has hit over the last 2 seasons? Again, just over a full season.
I think it's going to be like about 50.
37 home runs for A.J. Pollock over the last 2 years.
Okay.
So, I mean, most people would not think of A.J. Pollock, but if you bring that down to like 140, we're talking 32 home runs a year. Now, he did that with a batting average of about 290, an on-base percentage of about 340, and a slugging percentage of about 540. So we're talking about an 880 OPS with about 32 home runs and a batting average of 290. That's amazing. That's honestly amazing. Put up 3 wins above replacement last year. And so that's the context on A.J. Pollock. I think with the universal DH, you can get rid of a little bit of his defensive deficiencies. I would say he's fine. He's like league average defensively, I would say. He's not above average. He's not below average. He's not their best option in left field. Chris Taylor's probably a better option. Give Gavin Lux 2 months to play left field. He might be a better option out there. But I just think offensively what A.J. Pollock brings is significant there. Now, the other piece for me is the bullpen and how good I feel about the Dodgers bullpen. Now, I know people are looking and saying Jansen is gone, Joe Kelly is gone. How are we replacing 2 of our 3 best relief pitchers from last year? I think it's a fair question. One person I did some digging on, a signing that has kind of gone under the radar, is that the Dodgers signed Daniel Hudson for 1 year. I believe it was like $8 million, $8.5 million, something like that. So you put it in context with the Joe Kelly deal, he gets 2 years of about that money. The Dodgers get Hudson for 1. What's interesting to me is I look at those numbers. These 2 guys are actually pretty much a wash statistically last season. So the Dodgers are getting a guy in Hudson who's essentially going to replicate the Joe Kelly experience, although I shouldn't say replicate the Joe Kelly experience. That's a unique experience. He's going to replicate the performance of Joe Kelly, but adds a couple benefits. One is he throws a different fastball than Kelly does. Kelly throws a 2-seamer, very similar to Blake Trinan's, high velocity. Hudson's going to throw a high-velocity 4-seamer. So if you see Hudson and you see Trinan, you're seeing 2 dramatically differing movement profiles on their fastballs. I think that matters. But here's last season, okay? Hudson put up 1.1 wins above replacement. Joe Kelly put up 0.7. Part of that's because Hudson was more durable. He made 54 appearances. Joe Kelly made 48. Hudson threw about 7 innings more. ERA-wise, Joe Kelly was better, 2.86 to 3.31. Fielding independent pitching, that's a predictive measure, 3.08 for Kelly, 3.21 for Hudson. But here's where Hudson starts to separate himself. Strikeouts per 9. Daniel Hudson, 13.06. Joe Kelly, 10.23. Walks per 9. Hudson, 2.79. Joe Kelly, 3.07. So he's got way more strikeouts per 9, less walks per 9. You look at his StatCast stuff, Hudson, 93rd percentile whiff rate, 97th percentile strikeout rate, 82nd percentile expected ERA, 89th percentile expected batting average. So from the get-go, I think Hudson as a replacement for Joe Kelly is a fair argument. Now the question becomes, Matt, how do you replace Kenley Jansen? Where does that replacement come from? Because aside from Hudson, there aren't any free agent signings factoring in. So I'll give you first bite at this apple. If we agree that Hudson to Kelly is pretty much a wash, and again, I think you could even argue that Hudson might be a slight upgrade. Both these guys are about the same age. I think there's like a year, maybe year and a half difference between the two. Where would you guess the replacement value for Kenley Jansen comes from? Or do you think that's a hole that the Dodgers have yet to fill?
I don't think they filled it. Yeah, I think they need to sort of fill it. I would add an established either closer or just another veteran reliever to the bullpen, just because some of the guys we'll get into, I think, do have some question marks, and you kind of are hoping that
Yeah.
X, Y, and Z goes right, and that can kind of be a risky calculation. But if you want to just do surface level, I think like Trinan really is who quote unquote replaces Kenley Jansen's value.
Yeah.
And if you want to look at in terms of consistent production, you can argue obviously Trinan has been better than Kenley the past 2 years. All of that being said, every indication from the Dodgers is that he's not going to be locked into the closer role because they value how versatile he is,
Yeah.
being able to pitch, like I've said before, from the fifth inning on, face any kind of part of the lineup. So I think we'll see, Daniel Hudson maybe be more of the de facto, kind of closer set situation if like Trinan has to be used in the seventh or eighth inning for whatever reason. But Craig Kimbrell, he hasn't been tied to the Dodgers specifically, but he's somebody who's been mentioned as a potential trade target for other teams. I know the Braves were connected to him before they hammered out their deal with Kenley, and he would be coming on the same contract.
Yeah.
He's in the final year, and he's also at $16 million. So we'll have to see if the Dodgers end up going that route. But yeah, I mean, I think Hudson for Kelly, Trinan for Jansen is basically a trade, and you could argue that the Dodgers are in better position now than they were last year.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, the one thing to note, of course, is that Trinan was on the roster last year. So yes, he might fill the Kenley Jansen role, but then someone's got to fill the Blake Trinan role. Now, I think the names to watch, if you're saying how will the Dodgers make up for that? I think there's two routes. One is improvement. I think, we mentioned Trinan and Hudson as guys that you'll probably see in the ninth inning. I think there's two other guys that you'll see. Brusdar Graterol, I think, is a name to watch in the ninth inning a little bit. And Alex Vesia, I think, is a name to watch. I think those are four guys that just depending on usage and depending on matchup, if it's a lefty heavy group coming in, I think Vesia is going to get some saves. I think Graterol is going to get some saves. I think Hudson's going to get saves. I think Trinan is going to get saves. So the first place you'd look is say, can the Dodgers get some improvement out of Alex Vesia, out of Brusdar Graterol? And I think that's fair. I think Graterol especially, we started to see a breaking ball. If he could develop that, I mean, he has all of the potential to be an elite closer in Major League Baseball. So I think route number one is the guys that you already have, can we get some improvement out of them? Route number two are some of the new names, and I put new in quotation marks because these guys aren't actually new. One of them is Caleb Ferguson, hasn't pitched since 2020, obviously, because of Tommy John surgery, 25 years old. He won't be ready on opening day, and yet if you go back and look at Ferguson, the last time we saw him in 2020, 18 2/3 innings pitched, a strikeout rate of 13 strikeouts per 9. So that's Daniel Hudson levels, which, by the way, was 97th percentile in baseball last year. So we're talking about a guy with elite strikeout stuff. But how about this? Daniel Hudson's walks per 9 was 2.8. Caleb Ferguson in 2020, 1.45. So we're talking about a 97th percentile strikeout rate, and I would imagine that's probably in the 90th plus percentile for walk rate. He had a 2.89 ERA. So I think Caleb Ferguson is a guy from the left side that could come in and provide really high-end stuff. The other name would be Tommy Kenley, signed with the Dodgers last year, knowing that he was going to miss the entire season. Another guy that's not expected to be ready for opening day, but they're hopeful will be ready in the first few months of the season. Going back, he threw just one inning in 2020, but if you go back to 2019, he threw 61 innings, 3.67 ERA, again, a strikeout rate of 12.91, so elite, 2.93 walks per 9, 3.33 FIP. So everything I just said about Daniel Hudson, his numbers are very similar to Tommy Kenley's in 2019. Now, 2019 being the key word in that sentence. So I think those are two names to watch. Danny Duffy, a guy we'll talk about in just a moment, a recent signing of the Dodgers, coming back, did not pitch. But when he did pitch for the Royals last year, 2.51 ERA. That was primarily as a starter across 12 starts and 61 innings. But likely if he does come back for the Dodgers, I think it would be mostly as a bullpen role, sometimes as a starter role. And then obviously you've got guys that are 2, 3, 4, 5 months out, like Dustin May, Jimmy Nelson, another signing we'll talk about in a second. And so I think between Ferguson, Kenley, Duffy, once we get into like June, July, I think those three guys could more than make up. I think the Dodgers are going to continue their strategy of, yes, we've got Trinan, who's elite. We have Daniel Hudson, who's very good. But the strength of this bullpen is going to be our 8th best relief pitcher is going to be fantastic. And I think that's going to be the strength of this bullpen this year.
That's certainly fair, and I'll even add, Phil Bickford into that because if he can take sort of a step forward and make another, kind of continue his progression, then that I think frees up Brusdar Graterol to definitely be more of a late inning guy
Hmm.
as opposed to maybe needing him in the sixth or seventh because Bickford isn't necessarily ready to kind of take that role on.
Yeah.
Another one too is Carson Fulmer. Over the weekend he pitched. It obviously is only spring training. It was only it's early on, but he looked good and he's got the prospect pedigree. If the Dodgers have been able to sort of I don't want to say fix pitchers, but
Yeah.
refine pitchers in the past, you would think somebody with Fulmer's ceiling they could do the same. And then you stash him in the bullpen. There's another sort of unexpected weapon that you have.
Yeah, and Victor Gonzalez, another guy that if you want to look
Yep.
at a small spring sample, I mean, this guy was amazing in 2020, was really bad last year, but threw an inning the other day and looked very good. And you go down the line, they got Justin Brule, Clevenger, both those guys look good in limited action. Evan Phillips is unique in that he doesn't have any option years left, so he has to be on the major league roster, or otherwise they're going to have to DFA him. But he was very good in limited sample size. So Darian Nunez, who again, I mean, his stuff is nasty. We know this stuff is nasty. Can they sort of harness it? So I think there's some options there in the bullpen. I'm optimistic about the Dodgers bullpen. Even if you say, hey, it's going to be 90 to 95% of what it was last year, it was a really good bullpen last year. So I think that's going to be good enough when you talk about the lineup that we just mentioned. Let's move on to something we've hinted at now, which are some pitching signings. Danny Duffy, Jimmy Nelson, a couple names we've mentioned. Tyler Anderson, one we have not. These are three guys that the depth that the Dodgers have added. Duffy and Nelson got slotted into the rotating 60-day IL spot. And so it was like they signed three guys in a row that just went straight on to the 60-day IL. Nelson, potentially late in the year guy. Danny Duffy expected back around June, which again, the season's not starting till April, so just a couple months could be a contributor. But I think the important name here is Tyler Anderson. 1 year, $8 million deal, basically the same thing that Andrew Heaney got, I believe, from the Dodgers. Initially, I was like, oh, nice depth piece. Then I saw the contract. I'm like, oh, not necessarily a depth piece, probably a number 5 starter for the Dodgers. Here's the scoop on Tyler Anderson. The first and most important thing you need to know is he's a proud alumni of the University of Oregon. Fun fact, he was a part of their first recruiting class when they reinstituted the baseball program. So he was a first-round pick, though, of the Rockies a number of years ago. And this is a guy that, I mean, there's some positives and there's negatives. Let's start with the banner here. He is a number 5 starter, number 5/number 6 starter. Okay, so everything I'm about to tell you is going to sound underwhelming. Keep in mind that the options out there were very bare. I mean, like Zach Greinke got some money. I would probably prefer Anderson over Greinke if I'm being honest. But here's some stuff on Anderson. You look at his career. Again, it's not exactly everything that you would like to see. But last season, 4.53 ERA across 31 starts for the Rockies. Rockies, Coors Field, you got to do something with that. But 31 starts, I mean, durability counts. The good, 88th percentile in hard hit rate, 84th percentile in exit velocity, 89th percentile in walk rate. That's the good. Here's the bad, 23rd percentile in expected batting average, 32nd percentile in expected slugging, and 19th percentile in strikeout rate. All of that tells you this: soft tossing lefty that doesn't strike anybody out, doesn't walk anybody, doesn't give up hard contact. For this point in the regular season or in the offseason and where the Dodgers are now, I like the move.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, like you said, he's a number 5, number 6 starter, and at this point, the Dodgers are clearly just stockpiling starter pitching. Dave Roberts has said to begin the season, there's a good chance they're going to have to sort of piggyback some guys or just lean heavily on the bullpen because with the shortened spring training, pitchers just aren't going to be built up to the 6 innings that we're kind of accustomed to. So I think Anderson, Heaney, they're going to be more or less interchangeable in the rotation once all the dust sort of settles. And yeah, I mean, it's $8 million, so maybe a little bit more than you might have anticipated when the signing was first reported. But if he's an experienced pitcher, he's kind of an innings eater. I will just say, probably the most interesting aspect of this, and Andy McCall of The Athletic was who brought it up again and reminded me of it, was I think in 2017 or 16, Tyler Anderson was starting for the Rockies at Dodger Stadium against a game that Clayton Kershaw was starting. And Anderson was walking in from the bullpen like at 7:11 or 7:12. Home games during the week at Dodger Stadium obviously start at 7:10. Clayton Kershaw is notorious for being, strict sticking to his schedule. And he looked over from the mound and was upset. And after the game, he said, I forgot his exact comments, but he said Anderson was like disrespectful or something like that. So they'll have to get reacquainted in the clubhouse. But I thought that was pretty funny. It's always funny when some prior tension sort of overlaps. I know people were saying, some fans were saying the Dodgers should sign Carlos Correa, and we were pushing against that.
Yeah.
So this is obviously a much smaller scale.
Yeah, I think I could get over the late arrival from the bullpen. Not sure about the other. Yeah, I mean 2016 was his rookie year, so that makes sense. He was good, 3.54 ERA his rookie year. So I mean that was the best year of his career. Kind of was downhill from there. But it's also worth noting 2.1 wins above replacement for Anderson last year. Like that's really really solid. So if you could get 2 wins above replacement for a guy for $8 million and just again, he had a 4.5 ERA. You know what that equates to? That equates to 6 innings and 3 earned runs. The Dodgers would take that every single time when they're going to be scoring 6+ runs every game and have a solid bullpen. 4.53 ERA is not nearly as bad as it sounds when you're talking about a starting pitching. Duffy and Nelson, the other 2 signings from this past week. Obviously, nice to bring Duffy back. The Dodgers gave up a prospect for him, and then he never pitched. Not a high-level prospect, but a prospect nonetheless. Jimmy Nelson was one of the best relief pitchers in all of baseball when he was healthy. I like the Duffy signing more than the Nelson signing. The Nelson signing terrifies me because that guy keeps getting injured after injury after injury. Duffy, I believe, on a 1-year deal. Nelson, a 1-year deal with the team option for a 2nd year. Anything jump out to you about those 2 signings?
I think they're both good signings. Duffy definitely will come back if and when he does. Well, not if. Once he comes back healthy from his flexor tendon surgery, he will be pitching out of the bullpen. The Nelson one excites me a little bit more just because of the potential.
Yeah.
I think we saw it last year, when he sort of settled into being a relief pitcher. And of course, the big caveat to that is, will he stay healthy? And he expressed hope to pitch this season. I personally don't see it because you're talking Tommy John and a flexor tendon surgery.
Yeah.
So I think, he's definitely more of a 2023 play.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I mean, I like Nelson for the same reason you do. It's a quality over quantity guy. The ceiling on him is as high as anybody. Obviously, the injury risk is incredibly high. I like bringing Duffy back, though. I think that is a signing that's going to make a difference for this year. And I think he even said he thought he was going to have to call it a career. Turns out he didn't need Tommy John surgery. I think he even said he could have been back by May, and the Dodgers were like, all right, let's just chill out on that. We're not in a rush here. Let's shoot for June or July and go from there.
I think it's also cool too. He's somebody who grew up rooting for the Dodgers, and so those are always kind of cool stories. And you touched on it earlier with Kenley. Obviously, he spent his entire career up to this point with the Dodgers. But hey, if he was going to leave them, it's for a team that he grew up rooting for and a fan of, and so that also applies to Duffy. And it's also kind of a cool story.
Now, is the one sort of spin-off question I wanted to ask you here, as we talk about Anderson specifically slotting in, is I'm curious. The Dodgers have a clear first 3. Buehler, Urias, and Kershaw, top 3, unquestioned. 4, 5, 6, 7 is kind of where it gets really, really fascinating because you've got guys in Heaney and Anderson who they've paid serious money to, $8 million a piece for those 2 guys. Obviously, you've got the wild card of Trevor Bauer, who how long is he suspended for, and do the Dodgers even want him back after the suspension is in the mix there. And then you've got some young guys. Tony Gonslin, I know people don't consider a young guy, but hasn't really had time to establish himself, but has been very good from an ERA perspective when he has been in there. Some of the underlying metrics, not so much, but pitched injured last year, has been good historically. You've got prospects like Andre Jackson and Mitch White who have performed fairly well. You've got Dustin May, who's not really a part of this conversation because we don't expect him back until late in the year, and it's probably as a reliever, not being built up to a starter. You've got a guy like David Price, who I wonder if he's going to be on the roster by the end of this whole thing. And then you've got prospects like Ryan Pepio and Bobby Miller and Landon Knack and so on. And so, Matt, the question I want to ask you is, I just named about 10 guys, and I'm not asking who's going to be the opening day starter, but 6 months from now, end of the season, if all of those guys are healthy and available, who do you, and we'll take Bauer out of this because I think there's such a wild card and a question mark, but Heaney, Anderson, Gonsolin, Jackson, White, Pepio, Price, of those group, which 2 do you trust the most? Which 2 do you feel the best about saying at the end of the year, if everybody's healthy, I think these are the number 4 and 5 starters?
Well, do you want me to give you the opening day starter? Because I'll make my bold prediction right now.
The opening day starter or the first 5?
No, I can't do first 5.
Well, I know your opening day deal.
So yeah, obviously the top 3 starters are set. I think for an opening day rotation, I think Tony Gonsolin will be the 4th starter.
Okay.
I think he'll stick in that, barring obviously like a huge trade or something. And then come the end of the season, I think the 5th starter would have ended up being one of Heaney or Anderson. I don't know if Andre Jackson is quite ready to take on a full season's workload as a starter. Mitch White, I see more of a bullpen piece who we saw last year, how we saw him last year, where if the Dodgers get to a point where they need a spot start, then he's a candidate as well. Then, some of the top prospects, Pepio and Miller, I see those guys coming up more as, we're going to stash them in the bullpen, similar to what the Dodgers have done with Dustin May, from a couple years past. So yeah, that's kind of how I see things sort of shaking out come the end of the year.
So you've got Gonslin in one of those spots, and then you've got sort of a battle between Heaney and Anderson for the 5th spot.
Yeah. And I, like I've said on some of our other shows, if our viewers have missed it, I think, Dustin May will be back this season after the All-Star break at some point. I see him as probably being a bullpen guy, multiple inning reliever. I think the Dodgers will adjust that strategy if something happens with Tony Gonsolin or just their pitching depth in general. I think they'll maybe adjust their plan to get a little more aggressive in stretching him out, but I don't think that's something they want to rush.
Yeah. It's interesting because under the scenario you just described, which I don't disagree with, the Dodgers just paid $8 million for a number 6 starter, which that's a lot of money for a guy that you don't even have penciled into a spot in the rotation. Now, we know injuries happen. We know that the Dodgers, there's more condensed games this year. There's going to be a 2 doubleheaders I think the Dodgers have throughout the season. But then obviously if any games are canceled, there are way fewer off days because of sort of the condensed schedule a little bit. And so who knows, maybe they feel like there's opportunities for them to go 6 starters, stretch guys out, that kind of a thing. I'm with you if you followed this show and watched it before. I'm a Gonsolin guy. I know the underlying metrics aren't very good. I think mostly that's because of last year he was pitching through a shoulder injury and then sort of quickly coming off of a shoulder injury. I believe in Gonsolin. I think he probably has the highest upside of any of the group that we just talked about. The next guy I would say is Heaney. I mean, and again, it's all projection. We know his ERA isn't very good, but for whatever reason, the guys who track spin and sort of the underlying metrics, they love Andrew Heaney. And if there's a team that is ever going to unlock that, it's going to be the Dodgers. So I think I've got Heaney as the number 5 guy, and I think it's a boom or bust. Like, I don't think Heaney is going to turn into an average starter. Like, I think he's either going to be a guy who's got an ERA in the 3s or a guy who's got an ERA in the 5s. I'm not sure if that 4.5 range exists for him. Anderson, I think, will sit more in there. And so I feel good about those 3 as my back of the rotation. I know people are watching like, that's gross. I don't like any of those 3 guys. And again, I would just say rewind the tape a little bit and listen to us talk about the lineup and the bullpen. And that's why you should feel good about where the rotation is. So I'm with you. I've got Gonsolin in one of those spots, and I'll go Andrew Heaney in that last one, which I think, is that what you would guess how the 5 starters begin the season as well? Or do you think Anderson maybe takes Gonsolin's place to start the year?
No, I think Gonslin will end up, assuming he's healthy. We haven't seen him yet in spring training. I think he will end up the 4th starter coming out of spring training and into opening day. And I think, another thing to keep in mind is once the postseason gets here, like the Dodgers don't need a 5-man rotation. Like at that point, you need 4, which then if 3 of your 4 are high quality and dependable, then I don't want to say that the 4th starter isn't as important, but it gives you definitely a little bit more leeway there.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember, we're talking about 4, 5, 6 starters in the rotation, where, if you take what the Dodgers kind of have in potential and depth and compare it to pretty much any other team, they're standing, ahead of them.
Yeah.
Like they're in a better position than most other teams. I think just we've become spoiled to the fact that the Dodgers 1 through 5 have been pretty quality for the most part. And so now I think this year we're seeing a little bit of a drop off in that regard, at least for now. Like you said, maybe something is unlocked with Heaney and he becomes kind of that secret weapon. And then if you want to look ahead to next year and all that, like Dustin May will be back and he is a starter. And so things would be shored up that way too.
Yeah, and again, Bauer is sort of the complete elephant in the room wild card here, because if Bauer ends up pitching for the Dodgers, regardless of what you think of him as a person, the guy as a pitcher on the mound is very good. I mean, you could argue, I don't even think you'd have to argue, he's in that top 3 group. Like he moves into, now it's a Dodgers top 4, and who's the number 5 starter. And so we'll see. I mean, I think you could look at the bigger picture and say, do they sign Tyler Anderson if they actually think Trevor Bauer is going to pitch for them this year? That's a question mark, but I just look at the back. This will be the last thing I say. I look at the 4 through 8 group that the Dodgers have in starting pitching as just darts. We're buying as many lottery tickets as we can. And we're saying, can we unlock Heaney? If the answer is no, can we unlock anything with Anderson? If the answer is no, can we unlock anything? Can Andre Jackson improve? If the answer is no, can Mitch White improve? If the answer is no, is Ryan Pepio going to be ready? I think you just go down that line and you say, we just need one of these guys to figure it out. And I think that as a baseline, all 4 guys I just mentioned could be number 5 starters. Like, I think even Andre Jackson and Mitch White, if one of those guys was penciled in, maybe I wouldn't want a full 30 starts from them. But if you said, hey, Andre Jackson's going to make 15 to 20 starts for the Dodgers, I'm like, I don't think his ERA is going to be above 6. I think he'll be fine. So the Dodgers basically just buying a bunch of lottery tickets and saying, we need one of these, we need 2 of these to hit, and we'll be fine because we're going to score so many runs anyway. So, and not to mention, as you talk about the bullpen, if you've got a guy like Danny Duffy in the bullpen, if you've got a guy like Mitch White in the bullpen, you don't even need 5 innings out of your starters. You could go 3 different guys out there to go get you 2 to 3 innings each and see what happens. So lots of options there. Let's wrap up the show, though, real quick. We do have some real spring training games going on, Matt. You have been diligently paying attention and watching these. It's exciting to see, we didn't know if we were going to see this a month ago. So here we are. So I'll give you the floor here. A few spring training games under their belt. What has stood out to you about the Dodgers so far in spring?
I think so far, honestly, is Jason Martin. He's obviously was one of the offseason signings during the lockout, minor league deal. He does have major league experience. He was with the Rangers last season. He came out right away and just hitting home runs to left center field, back-to-back games. I think he had another base hit the other day. He would obviously need to be added to the 40-man roster if he's going to be part of the bench equation at some point, but him and Eddie Alvarez was another minor league signing Dave Roberts specifically mentioned as sort of raising the floor of the Dodgers bench depth, which again we touched on it during the offseason and again earlier in this show. That was a real weakness for the team last year. They tried a bunch of different options and nothing really stuck. So if they can get something, if Jason Martin can be that productive bat off the bench, I think that would be huge. If you want to call it a downside, is that he bats left-handed, which like we've talked about before, one way or another, the Dodgers always seem to end up with left-handed hitters. But yeah, I mean, that's a positive. Like I mentioned earlier, Carson Fulmer, it was, obviously brief, but he looked good, kind of showed some of the potential that made him a top prospect at, one former time. Now this week, we're going to start getting into Max Muncy's playing. Freddie Freeman's making his debut. Mookie Betts is going to play. So as we kind of get later into the week, I think you'll start to see some of the regulars starting and playing longer, more innings per game.
Yeah, and I mean, Luke Raley just getting traded recently, that's another move that we could have mentioned. The key of that move is simply that it opens up a 40-man roster spot. They basically trade a guy for a relief pitching prospect who's on a minor league deal that is not on the 40-man roster, so that's the move there. But, I mean, he's a guy like, look, none of us are huge Luke Raley fans. I always thought he was going to be the odd man out on the 40-man roster, so the fact that they were able to get something for him, and some people think this guy's a decent prospect that they got back. He'll be in the top 20 or 30 of the Dodgers organization, but you start to lose some of that depth, like you said, because they had to add a bunch of guys, Yori Vivas, Eddie Leonard, James Outman, to the 40-man roster. Aside from Outman, none of those guys, Jacob Amaya, another one, none of those guys are necessarily ready to contribute this year. So a guy like Martin, who, as you said, 26 years old, former 8th-round pick, like, who knows? That's a nice guy. He's on a minor league deal, so they don't have to do anything. They can stash him in AAA, and then as they need him, bring him up. One guy I wanted to ask you about, though, is Ryan Pepio. I was excited to see him starting. It did not go well. The irony of all of this is Steven Souza Jr., who could not put bat on ball when the Dodgers needed him to last year, hits a grand slam off of Ryan Pepio. Pepio believed to be, of all the Dodger pitching prospects, I wouldn't say the highest rated. I think most people have Bobby Miller ahead of him, but Pepio is much closer to the major league level. So for him to give up 6 runs in 1 inning, I know it's spring training. It is Steven Souza, who is, major league level hitter, I would say, but are you concerned at all about how that outing went? Does that change sort of the timeline for Pepio to you?
Not at all. And I mean, to begin with, I'm probably one of the more modest in terms of projecting, what he will contribute this year and when that might come. I'm not expecting it really until the second half of the year. I don't want to say if at all, but I mean, like we just touched on, the Dodgers do have a ton of pitching depth where if stuff does sort of work out, I think, the way they hope, like you won't necessarily need Ryan Pepio this season. With his start against the Mariners, it began with kind of a jam shot leadoff single. The ball rolled by Pepio and it was hit hard enough to get by him, soft enough to, not get to second base before the batter could reach. And then the grand slam, Souza just ambushed the first pitch. And I think Pepio, that's part of the learning process, right? In AAA, you could probably get away with a first pitch fastball at the knees. Spring training, Steven Souza Jr., a veteran hitter, not so much.
Yeah.
So he just jumped all over that. And I mean, there was a little bit of bad luck mixed in. some signs of encouragement. But it's spring training, and this is what it's for especially somebody like Pepio.
Yeah. Well, we've got a couple more weeks of spring training. Obviously, opening day again, April 7th. Dodgers won't play until April 8th. So, I mean, that's 17 days away, which is absolutely crazy to think about that it's right around the corner. So, hey, folks, we appreciate you joining us. As I said, this is exciting for us. This is our first Dodger Heads full-length episode of the 2022 regular season. So, we appreciate you joining us. If you missed it at the beginning, please check us out wherever you get your podcasts. Even if you're not a podcast person, if you want to just go into Apple Podcasts, click follow, rate, review, we would greatly appreciate that. That helps us sort of get things off of the ground. As always, if you're here at YouTube, subscribe, ring the notification bell. We will have tons of content for you, especially as the regular season comes. We're going to have live post-game recaps. We're going to have daily content as well. So check that out, Dodger Blue 1958 on social media. And, of course, DodgerBlue.com, where Matt is the editor of that site. We appreciate you joining us. As always, that's Matt Moreno. My name is Jeff Spiegel. Opening day just around the corner. We'll see you soon.